morning, everyone. Hello and welcome to 2021 SACNAS Community College Day 2. My name is Katerina Poradyuk, and I'm honored to serve the SACNAS community as the Student Programs Manager. To kick things off this morning, I want to give a special welcome to our first-time attendees to SACNAS. SACNAS is an inclusive organization dedicated to achieving true diversity in STEM, where the field reflects the demographics of our country's population. As the nation's largest multicultural and multidisciplinary STEM diversity organization, SACNAS creates space where all members, partners, and staff feel they belong and can embrace and celebrate their intersectional identities. After today, I hope each of you will join us as an official member. I'm so happy to see all of you here today. Please introduce yourself in the chat, share your name and the institution you're attending. You are encouraged to use the social media and to share your favorite moments throughout this event, and use our official hashtag. You can see on the screen on the bottom right. Here at SACNAS, you're now at the national setting. Over the next several hours, you're going to meet fellow students and mentors from across the country. I strongly encourage you to take advantage of this opportunity to share your dreams, challenges, and your advice throughout this morning in the chat feature. One of the big takeaways from yesterday was to continue asking questions. Remember, there are no silly questions. You are in the community who wants to help you and who are invested in your success. So let's get started. Now, I would like to invite the chair of SACNAS Community College Task Force. I have the pleasure to work closely with Dr. Nicole Traeger. Dr. Nicole Traeger holds a BS in biochemistry and PhD in immunology. Currently, she serves as the director of the Mathematics, Engineering, Science and Achievement (MESA) program at Los Medanos Community College, working with STEM students to transfer and obtain a 4-year degree. She's a proud first-generation college graduate and Mexican-American. Please help me to welcome Nicole Traeger.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad you are here. I'm here to tell you about our second day of Community College Day and welcome you to another exciting day in our event. First, before we get started, I would like to make a land acknowledgement as we gather for this meeting. We are physically dispersed, but we are virtually connected. And I would like to take a moment for us to reflect on the meaning of place, and doing so, recognize the various traditional lands in which we congregate today. I am currently in Northern California, and I am on Bay Miwok land, which sits in the shadow of Mount Diablo. And I want to acknowledge the elders, past, present, and emerging, of all the land we work, live, and breathe on. And we want, with gratitude and respect, to acknowledge all of this land. I encourage you to research the native territories near you and to acknowledge your land. You can do so on this website at native-land.ca. SACNAS Community College Day, and this year it's 2 days. You are here attending the second day. It is really a threefold type of conference. We are here to build community within STEM and really with the community college student in mind. We really want to provide motivation and success tools for you, and of course provide professional and career insights so that once you finish that wonderful degree, whatever it is for you, that you can pursue a wonderful career in STEM. I would like to go over our agenda for the day. We are welcoming you here and going over the agenda. And then we are going to have an amazing keynote speaker, which I will introduce here in a second. And then we will have some awesome student presentations from students that have done research while in community college. And I encourage you to attend those student presentations and ask some hard-hitting questions to those students. And then we will have a panelist discussion, which is really explore and inspire. So you will be able to explore some future career goals and be inspired by these people who have some varying careers that are out there, from physics to teaching to clinical research, which is just some amazing panelists. We have a shortened agenda today than yesterday, but no less exciting. So with that, I am really excited to introduce our keynote speaker. I have the pleasure of introducing Robin D. Lopez, and I believe the D stands for darn good at science. Robin is a fellow Northern Californian up here in the Bay Area, and he started out in community college at Contra Costa Community College. And I will let him tell you about his experiences in community college. But he started out in community college and then transferred to a state university, where he earned his bachelor's in engineering and then a master's, and he has been awarded an NSF grant to then pursue a PhD. He is now a PhD candidate, as you can see, in environmental science policy and management at University of California at Berkeley. But with all of these wonderful things on his resume, the most standout thing about Robin is his love for community. And he really takes that to heart, the community aspect of community college. And he really has been giving back to his community ever since he was a student. And he really believes in the community aspect of science. And I am so excited to have Robin darn good at science Lopez here. So thank you for coming, Robin.
Thank you very much for that intro, Nicole and Katarina. I'm gonna share my slide deck really quickly. I'm not gonna ask if you see it. I'm assuming everyone could see it. But before I get into the gist of this and what we're gonna dive into, I just wanna be forward and transparent that if you came here to hear a keynote about anything science, you came to the wrong keynote. I'm not going to talk about the science that I do. And in fact, I'm not really going to talk much about myself. This keynote is more so geared towards all of you who are in attendance or will be watching the recording later. I also do want to give a gentle heads up. You may hear a lot of tiny humans during the course of this presentation. I have 8 sisters and 3 brothers and 14 nieces and nephews, and they like to come through sometimes, and that's perfectly fine. But if you hear someone talking about chocolate being thrown on the wall or someone stepped in the dog poop outside, don't worry about it. We're cool. Someone else will take care of it. I'm going to keep going through the presentation. All that said, my keynote today, staying loyal to the soil, intersections of ecology, race, justice, and accountability. It is my pleasure to be here today. It is an honor and a privilege to be able to interact with all of you today, because for me, the reality is that you all are going to go on and do great and amazing things. Whether you believe that or not right now, that's the reality. And I get the honor of being able to say I was once in the same space as you. Just as, some of my past mentors now get to say that they were once in the same space as me. And it's always a beautiful moment when they come up to me like 10 years later, sharing that. I also, before I move on with the slide, I also want to acknowledge that today is recognized as May Day, and this is a day in which we certainly need to show our thanks and our gratitude to many of the migrant workers and undocumented folks who are the backbone of our society and ensure that our society functions the way that it does to keep us fed, to keep things moving and flowing and going. And so I just want to make sure I put that out there. Um, and of course, as you see, my pronouns, he, him, but you all are free to refer to me as whatever you please. Uh, Similar to what Nicole did, I do want to take this moment of acknowledgement. Um, in fact, if to the extent comfortable, I'll link this in the chat, the native land link. But if you're not familiar or don't know where you're at, check that link and maybe drop it in the chat. If you're able to, shout out whose land you're on. Um, for me, before we move forth, I would like to take this moment to recognize the space we currently occupy as Ohlone land. I'd also like to recognize that the indigenous knowledge that has afforded us the privilege of enjoying such environment, such as my home communities of Oakland and Richmond, California. And I challenge us all to think critically about how we can decolonize such spaces and ways of thinking. And that said, I'm tapping in from Richmond, California on unceded territory of the Ohlone people. I also want to take this a bit further and have moments of acknowledgement for the continuous racial and social injustice. Uh, you may recognize this young man's face who's been at the center of a lot of media attention, Adam Toledo, and there are countless others that I think would take several days to get through, even in the backyards of my own communities out here in the Bay Area. Uh, in a time of deep reckoning with racial and social injustices, it is imperative we leverage our positionality to truly catalyze change. As rising scholars, educators, and scientists, we are not immune or insulated to the trauma of this world. And nor are we exempt from engaging in the necessary and uncomfortable dialogue. The work that we do in academia and science has direct and indirect impact in upholding systemic and institutional barriers. Recent events have motivated me to shift the direction of this presentation. And when I say recent events, I mean very recent. Um, even as recently as a couple days ago, a young man who I mentor, who's still a teenager, had had a run-in, mistaken identity, and now we are working to try and advocate for him to not let justice do bad on him for something he didn't do. And so that's what I mean when I refer to recent events that have motivated me to kind of shift this. I do want to focus on how this intersects with the sciences, but we can't do that unless we actually acknowledge some of the racial and social undertones that had positioned us in the way that we are, in the way the society operates. Because if this was a ideal and perfect society, then we likely wouldn't have had a need for SACNAS to begin with to create this space for us, this space where we could feel brave and unapologetic. And I hope through the course of this keynote that you'll get a sense of that. Really quickly, because you've heard much of my background, and I said I don't want to talk too much about myself, but my background, I'm a scientist, scholar, educator, born in Oakland, California, raised in Richmond. I'd actually barely graduated high school, but dabbled in music as a youth, which was really fun. And that picture is actually from a photo shoot back when I was young and used to rap. And I'm also indirectly system impacted, and that's something I take ownership of. Um, Additionally, I dropped out of community college a good 3 times, and that's perfectly okay. Uh, in the course of my journey, I have learned that it's important to take your time to allow yourself to grow and mature at your own respective pace. Move to the beat that feels comfortable for you. And shortly after, I'd switched my hustle after several traumatic events, a friend being murdered, incarcerated, and my best friend dying by suicide, actually. I had decided to go back to school and take it seriously. And that has led me to where I'm at now as a hood ecologist. I'm a researcher for the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab since 2012. It started off as an internship while I was in community college. There are internships just for community college students to intern at one of these 17 national labs across this country. And you could easily do that. Um, I wouldn't say easily because we still have systemic oppression, structural barriers, but you get what I mean. But as you also heard, I'm also a PhD scholar at UC Berkeley in the freshwater and ecohydrology lab groups and just really causing damage. And the other image you see to the left, that's actually when I submitted my application as an astronaut candidate uh, with NASA. So I'm still waiting to hear back if I get selected for an interview. If there's anyone from NASA tapping in that's part of that process, I'm plugging myself right now. Hook your boy up with an interview. I'm just shooting my shot to go to the stars. And I think everyone should take advantage of every opportunity they can. Um, I share that because that's an example of also living your ancestors' wildest dreams and to be able to not just contextualize it in the scope of where I came from and where I'm at now, but to contextualize it in the sense of where my ancestors came from and how they passed the baton on to the generations before me and how that baton is now in my hand. And now it's anyone's guess where that baton ends up, but I hope it goes very far in this world. And uh, just a little bit more about the background. I do want to give content warning that I will be talking a little bit about mental health and suicide and suicide prevention very briefly. So if anyone feels triggered or has a sense of trauma from that, I do apologize and I'll do my best to make sure I don't evoke any heavy sense of emotion, but that is part of my story and it is part of my valid existence of why I'm here. Um, Before we get into that, though, I do want to talk about representation really quickly. That statistically, I'm not supposed to be here. That few scholars navigate these spaces safely. That rise from similarly historically marginalized environment. And anecdotally, my interactions and perceptions of nature are very different for me than most of my colleagues, which I'll tap on really quickly. But also folks like us are not afforded equitable access and exposure and resources to actualize our respective potential. And now, so I earlier said my perceptions of nature are very different. And that's something I want to highlight and a big reason why I'm in my PhD program in environmental science policy and management. Because for many folks of color who are operating in an oppressive system, uh, our perception of nature can sometimes be one that is viewed as a space of violence, a space of trauma, and a space of pain. And so it is with my goal that I try to bring more folks from similar backgrounds or those from historically marginalized identities into these spaces so that we can reclaim it and make it a space where all of us are welcome and it's inclusive, that we detach and decolonize from this Western idea that green spaces are spaces that we're not supposed to touch, that we're not supposed to interact with them, that nature is just a place where you look at it and you gaze at it. Because the reality is our ancestors interacted with nature. There was a connectedness, and that's what I'm trying to bring forward. Um, and speaking of my ancestors, I'm here because of my ancestors, my future descendants, my mentors, and a lot of luck. Uh, and I want to dive into that, uh, but also I want to acknowledge a couple things. What you see on the slide right now is the ofrenda that we had a couple last during the last Day of the Dead, and this is one of my adorable little nieces. You may hear her in the background shortly, and I think it's very beautiful when we're able to pass on that sense of cultural connection to the next generation, and that they hold that dear to them. More so, I think it's beautiful because I wasn't raised speaking Spanish. I wasn't raised speaking the language of some of my ancestors, and so I wasn't able to have that sense of cultural connection. But in other ways, my family was able to make up for it and make sure we stay connected in the best ways possible. Um, the part of the reason I'm here is again because of those ancestors who have laid out the groundwork for me. That first image to the top is actually my grandfather. He had passed the first week that I started my master's program at San Jose State University. And this is a story I don't really share with many people, but I think it's important to share it now in this space, and I'm entirely comfortable. And I'll say again, just for all intent and purposes, I'm completely comfortable with everything being recorded that it's going to be shared. Um, but this was a man who came to the US, or what was considered the US land. He came, I believe he told me at the age of 14 by himself, and eventually found himself in the Bay Area and ended up having a total of 15 children. My father was one of them. And this is where we're at now. And he's part of that story. He's part of that legacy. But it also pains me that he doesn't get to see what his legacy has brought forth and what I'm doing today, what my siblings are doing today, what my nephews and nieces are going to be doing tomorrow. That second image with the lovely lady, that's my maternal grandmother. And I'll try not to get emotional, but she had passed away last year during the pandemic. And she was one of my biggest cheerleaders. And I'm very honored to have her as an ancestor now. She she was the only reason I used to use Facebook, because she was always comment on everything and like everything. And shout out to all the grandparents on Facebook gassing up their grandchildren. We pretend like we don't like it, but internally we love it. And it really hurt that I had lost her in the way that we had lost her. She went to the hospital and never came back. We had to say goodbye to her through Zoom. And if that doesn't scream 2020, I don't know what does. But I share this and I'm vulnerable in this moment to also highlight that my journey doesn't come without that pain and without that trauma and without that motivation. And I've had enough losses in my life uh, physically to understand that death is a process, grieving is a process, and it's okay. And I hope that all of you who may be dealing with issues pertaining to COVID-19 and this pandemic, or even prior, before the pandemic, issues that you've come across, I hope you understand and recognize that you're okay, and that you shouldn't feel bad about articulating how you feel or your experiences. 'Cause again, those are your lived truth, and that is what makes you who you are. And again, I cannot do a presentation without acknowledging the groundwork that my ancestors have put on and allowed to run deep into the soils that I now get to walk on and literally explore and study. But in the context of ancestors, my ancestors are more than what you think. These images that you see are many of my friends who are no longer here. These are the people who have now been gifted as my ancestors. And unfortunately, there's only about 2 people on this slide that live to see the age of 30. This is the reality of the environment that I've come from. And this is not even the whole imagery of all the people I've lost growing up. Even to this day, we lose people. Um, the picture right dead center in the middle actually is the best friend who had died by suicide. And I'm not going to digress into the details of that, but I will share that that truly catalyzed me to reassess my life and reassess the decisions I was making that were very detrimental, not only to my health, but to my ability to live. Uh, and part of that was just being in this environment. I grew up thinking I would not live past the age of 18. So I lived reckless because my assumption was my life expectancy is 18. So when I turned 18, I was like, whoa, this is cool. I'm 18. And then when I turned 21, I was like, oh, snap. Like, I'm still alive. Like, maybe I should go to college or something. And around that time was when I had lost my best friend. And I share this as well as a reminder for all of you that we should never wait for a traumatic event to be our catalyst for change. That we should look into ourselves and look into our community and see what inspires us right now, what motivates us right now, what can push you to actualize your potential right now. Don't allow yourself to have to be confronted and reckon with these issues, um, because they do happen, but it becomes very complex and becomes very difficult, which I think most folks understand, and trying to process grief and also trying to make progress on your own personal goals. Um, that all I have to say in terms of the ancestors. And I know I had mentioned a lot of it's luck, and it really is. A lot of people say that I've earned it or that I've worked really hard to get here. And yeah, that's true. But so did all these other faces that you see in front of you. They all worked really hard, but they didn't get a fair shake in life. They weren't given equitable opportunity. Many of these people, in fact, damn near all of them, I always thought were more highly intellectual than me. I always thought were more creative than me. And to recognize that these ancestors now get to carry that on for me as my guides to help me carry on that creativity, I find that special. And so I don't allow myself to dig deep into the act of losing them physically. I think of it more so as an asset that I'm blessed to have people like this guide me. Um, and so, that said, it's also important to recognize that many of us who are moving on to our educational journey, um, there is some privilege there that we have to be able to have those pursuits, and to recognize that some people just weren't given those same opportunities or resources. And so it's on us to make sure that we keep those doors open for those behind us, those in front of us, those beside us, all around us. And that said, in the context of ancestors guiding me, I use that to try to improve our methods of scientific outreach, because right now they're severely inadequate. And many of you might be experiencing that right now, or maybe you don't feel like you're being provided socially and culturally relevant information on the transfer process. Maybe the information doesn't resonate with your identity and your experiences. And that tends to hold true for a lot of folks from historically marginalized identities. And so we have well-intentioned effort that can be acknowledged, yes, but most programming all seems like shallow efforts of diversity. And our communities are literally drowning in shallow waters of outreach. That critical information and that exposure, like internship and tips and tricks on application, those are locked within the ivory tower of academia. And oftentimes, the only time we get access to that is when we're in these privileged spaces like right now, where you hear from someone who's walked that path, who has resonating identity that can share it with you. Because for some weird reason, they don't make it readily available to everyone. And so I would like to push that a bit further, that along those shallow waters, we have those deep roots. And this is what I mean when I say staying loyal to the soil. We have these very deep, rich roots within these soils that we all come from. Literal and figurative roots that interconnect with the subsurface. That these vast, mysterious connections, they're just waiting to be explored and explained. It makes me think of habitat restoration and ecosystem protection. We talk about this often, but seldom does academia interact with the original land stewards, such as native and indigenous knowledge, and who actually did the amazing job of maintaining and protecting ecosystems for thousands of years. Western science is just now catching up to that. And this has a lot to do with you, because many of you come from cultural backgrounds and experiences where the way your ancestors and the way maybe even your grandparents or your parents perceive nature is exactly what we need to save this planet. And so I think about ecological integrity a lot in my own research. And, I may have lied. I know I said I wasn't going to talk about my research, but maybe that's a trait of men who lie often. So I apologize for lying. Uh, I will briefly talk about research. I want to touch on the three quick projects that I've worked on. In Northern California, I have the Russian River watershed, and I look at fish survival, migration, and response to climate change, specifically looking at coho salmon and how they are responding to that climate change, to drought severity, and to groundwater influence on a specific parameter called dissolved oxygen. I'm not going to get into that. If it piques your interest, feel free to message me later. I'll leave my email at the end of this. Um, I also think of Northern Alaska's Arctic ecosystem, where I'm analyzing permafrost, our frozen soil, to contextualize the impact of climate change in that system. And I think about stream restoration nationally, assessing where these restoration projects are being prioritized and what level of investment is being provided. Spoiler alert, and not surprising, it's not equitable. Um, that all sounds straightforward, right? You've seen what I just shared on this last slide deck, my research. And yeah, it seems straightforward, might seem intimidating, like what my niece is doing right there, a little like, ooh, shaky. I don't know what Theo Robin talking about, but it sounds dope. And little Pablo just like, he sounds cool, he looked cool. But I think it's deeper than that. And I think, in fact, I know it's deeper than that. And this is where we need to allow that social justice lens to be projected onto how we do our science. And so I want to take it a bit deeper. And I want to share these next few slides with you to really establish that connectedness that I hope you all can develop in your respective field. I think of myself as that coho salmon, trying to survive. People want to help, but don't fully understand the problems needed to be solved. I think of the outmigration process, a small fish in the vast ocean, moving with the water. We know that the fish is somewhere out there, but we won't know what it's doing to survive. We only know that if it survives, it eventually finds its way back home. I think of myself as that deep Arctic permafrost soil, trying to support other forms of life, of plants and microbes, while maintaining resiliency in a challenging and changing environment. I think of that sawing process. When Arctic soils thaw out or melt, we witness the awakening of things that have been frozen for 10,000 plus years, uncertain of the reactions to come. And all we can do is strategize for each potential scenario and be ready for changes in the climate. I think of myself as that water that flows through rivers and streams, trying to avoid contamination, sometimes moving fast and at other times moving slowly and calmly. I think of the hydrology process, where and how water moves to support all forms of life, nature, and connection. How water can find itself in the depths of the subsurface, confined in aquifers, to being removed without consent, to flowing freely in vast networks of Mother Nature's veins, to being lifted and coming back to be born again in the waters, springs of our mountains. Those are ecological stories I resonate with. Those are the stories and the identities that I want to come to the surface of my own research. In this picture, you see me cooling in the urban green space of my own city in Richmond, California, and just throwing it up. We're here for them. And I hope those are similar ecological stories that you can also resonate with and feel empowered to share that sense of connection that you have with whatever you do and allow that to come to the surface of your research. Because technically what I'm doing is not something that's normal or is not the status quo of what PhD researchers do. But I'm not here to be part of the status quo. I'm here to be a threat to that system and to completely upend it. And I hope you all join me in the process too. And that said, as I start to wrap this out, I know I'd mentioned or alluded to justice and accountability and this ecological sense and this idea of staying loyal to the soil. And so I want to close it out in these next couple slides with some points that I hope you keep in mind and keep to heart when we're talking about addressing anti-oppression in science, because we all have a responsibility. And unfortunately, that labor is constantly put on us to do the work when we are not the ones who created the system that oppresses us. But hey, if they want to put the labor on us, then we're going to do it our way and how it needs to be done. So that said, when we're talking about addressing anti-oppression in science, it needs to be handled with intent and care, like how our ancestors do for us. It needs to hold space and acknowledge the nuances and complexities of different experiences. It needs to ensure it's never complacent, that the work never ends. And that goes for all types of relationships and everything you do. It needs layers of accountability. It needs participation from everyone, not just me, not just you, your mentors, your peers, your lab group members, your classmates. And it needs more than just representation. We need a seat at the decision-making table. We can't just be sitting in the background and allowing people to exploit and take our ideas, and then they go to the decision-making table and want to interpret what our experiences are within their own lens. We need to be able to bring that to the table. Anti-oppression needs robust support financially, emotionally, and professionally. And it needs asset-based framework that supports mutual aid benefit. It needs to move away from this deficit model thinking. And again, I just mentioned mutual aid. It requires mutual aid. It requires vulnerability, like what I've been expressing throughout this keynote. And it requires advocacy. And I think that's something that we are all fully capable of doing. We don't need to be perfect in the classroom. We don't need to be perfect in the way we collect data or how the science looks. But if we show that human element of being vulnerable and being advocates and champions and accomplices for other folks and for ourselves, that's the type of scientist I want to work with. And so looking ahead, as I close this out, in the words of the homie Beto Vasquez, it's your story. Don't let somebody else write it for you. And I'll say this too, that you should move unapologetically as your whole authentic self. And I found for myself personally, as I've learned to do that, more opportunities have opened for me, and it allowed me to identify what opportunities are suitable for me or not. Because if someone can't accept me for who I am and the way I dress or the way I look or the tattoos on my body or the way I speak, then they don't deserve me. Because the reality is most of these institutions, they need you way more than you need them. And I want you to take that to heart, and I want you to know that and recognize that. But also recognize that the hustle and ingenuity is already deeply embedded in your DNA, and it runs richly through your bloodline. So stay loyal to the soil and let the world know what's up. Thank you very much for your time. As I promised, my email is here on the slide deck, rdlopez@berkeley.edu. And if you want to connect on Twitter, Instagram, my handle is @RichmondLife. Very happy to connect with all of you. I'll leave this up for like maybe 30 more seconds if any of you want to screenshot it. But thank you very much. And I hope this inspires some of you and really challenges you to think about the way you move in this world and in this society and what you have to contribute in science. Thank you.
Thank you again, Rowan, for sharing your journey, experiences, challenges, and call for actions with us this morning.